For most of my career, I've worked in the insurance industry, which normally, when you explain that to somebody or start that as a conversation opener, it's normally a conversation killer. It's not an exciting job. It's not the most exciting industry. It's not setting the world alight. But there's a reason I actually love the insurance industry, and I love insurance as a concept. And that's that it's, in a way, one of the most basic and simple transactional processes there can be. And it's particularly, I love it because of its history. And if you think about insurance in its simplest form, it's effectively someone who has an asset that's worth something to them, and they're concerned that a certain event is going to cause them to lose that, and they can't afford to lose it. And on the other side of that, there's someone who believes that they understand that asset's value, and they believe that they understand the risk of that event happening, and is willing to take an educated gamble, an educated bet on that event occurring and that loss happening. And the two of them combined make a transaction. And there's an aspect of that transaction, of that agreement, that I think applies to a lot of life, and in particular applies to our approach to relationships, and particularly toxic relationships. And that's that insurance in itself is based around the concept of good faith. And what do I mean by that? It's a really, really basic idea, in that when you enter into an insurance agreement, it is on the principle that both parties are going into it in good faith. So that the person who has the asset, who wants that asset insured, is describing that asset, declaring that asset in good faith to the best of their knowledge, and that they're also going to meet the obligations and requirements set upon them by the person insuring it in good faith. And on the other hand, the person who's insuring that asset is entering that in agreement that they'll also pay out on that risk event occurring in good faith. So they're not going to try and cheat that person and try and weasel their way out of, the insurance claim. So, for example, if you go back to the classic kind of origins of large insurance, you're talking about the shipping industry. People are sailing ships and trading ships around the world, and those ships are carrying goods that are worth a lot of money, and some of them don't make the journey. Some of them succumb to weather. Some of them succumb to piracy. And as such, those people sailing those ships who don't want to make that loss seek out insurers, groups of insurers who are willing to insure that. And as they put that in place, the insurer, the person who's going to pay out the money if that happens, sets out certain conditions to the person taking that ship. And, things like you have to have armed people on board, a certain amount of them armed in a certain way, trained in a certain way in case of piracy. You're going to take a specific route to the location you're going to, where I can understand the conditions better. You're not going to sail or set out in certain weather. Those kind of conditions that basically say, look, here are the parameters in which I'm pricing this insurance for you on. And as long as all those conditions are true, and I believe in good faith that you've met those conditions, then I'll pay your claim. Now, where this applies to toxic relationships, or just relationships in general, is it's exactly the same thing in a relationship, in that two people enter it in good faith, that you're going to meet your obligations, that you're going to be good to each other, that it's an exclusive relationship, and that while you're in that relationship, you're going to basically both behave in a certain way. There are certain things that are out of bounds, there are certain things that we won't do. And the key thing about insurance is, if that good faith is broken, if you don't have that good faith relationship, then ultimately the insurance product doesn't work. And if you think about the insurance example, if good faith isn't adhered to, if the person taking out the insurance doesn't act in good faith, lies about the value of the asset, lies about what it is, lies about the event, doesn't meet their obligations, then ultimately the price that the insurer is giving to them is invalid. There is no price for bad risk, as it were. And on the other side, if the insurer, the person who's paying out that claim, doesn't act in good faith, doesn't meet their obligations to pay the claim even though the person taking out the insurance has met their obligations, then ultimately the product's worthless and there is no future product. No one will buy that from in the future because they don't trust that it will be paid out. So that whole arrangement, the whole principle of insurance, as complicated as it gets and as big as it can get, and insurance products can get fairly complex, it still comes down to that basic principle of two parties agreeing a price based on the fact that they will both behave in that transaction in good faith. And knowing, having the incentive that if they don't, then ultimately there is no future transactions. And the reason I bring this up, have you ever seen insurance go wrong? And it has gone wrong in certain industries. Now, insurance had and probably still has a very bad name. And the reason is that a lot of people don't trust insurers to pay out. In the past, some insurers have stupidly tried to weasel out of claims, tried to find technical aspects to not pay claims because they don't want to take the loss, which ultimately breeds that distrust in the product and ends up in a legal argument about who should pay what, down to the very technical specifics of who should pay a claim, but ultimately destroys the product in itself because people who don't trust insurers to pay out claims won't take insurance products because they don't believe it's worth the paper it's written on, certainly not worth the premium paid. And that happens in relationships, and it's very easy when things start going wrong in a relationship, and as they did in mine, it's very easy to start falling into the technical blame game and trying to look at the technical aspects of who's wrong, who's right, who's doing what in a relationship, and lose focus on the fact that there is no good faith in that relationship anymore. And this is something that as I was going through my breakup, I noticed a lot, and particularly it's applied by people suffering from narcissistic personality disorder, that it's almost like a legal argument, that rather than just admitting that actually, we entered this relationship in good faith, that we were both going to act in a certain way, we were both going to build trust in each other, we were both going to, be loyal to each other, that instead of looking at the basic principle that good faith wasn't there in the first place, or is certainly not there now, it becomes a legal discussion about the technicalities, about who did what when, why someone should forgive someone, and that's a circle that can be extremely destructive. And ultimately it comes down to the fact that relationships, just like insurance, should be based on good faith. And the moment that's gone, you're into that legal argument that ultimately is a loser for both parties. There is no future in a relationship if that good faith is gone. And there's a question there around whether that can be reinstalled and re-established. But once it's not there anymore, then effectively you're two parties in a legal argument with each other and not a relationship. So the point of this video is really just to try and highlight that if you're in a relationship where that good faith is no longer there, that trust has gone, then you're probably arguing about the technicalities of who did what and who's to blame and who's right or wrong. And my point is, you're going to spend a lot of time, a lot of energy and a lot of stress trying to work that out. But ultimately, it's a lot easier, it's a lot more simple just to acknowledge and understand that there is no good faith in that relationship anymore. And without that, a relationship cannot exist. It is not the relationship that was originally started. And like I said, there's a question about, do you think you can restore it? But it's never going to be restored while you're arguing about the technicalities. And I wasted years in that discussion about who was to blame, who's right, who's wrong, who did what when. But ultimately, what I realised and what I should have realised, that was my ex entered our relationship not in good faith. And if I looked at it like an insurance company, the moment I realised that the other party didn't enter it in good faith, I should have exited and cancelled that contract once and for all.